Well, thank you, Cassandra. There are times when you're in public speaking when you have a bit of a kick in the googlies, to use the Australian vernacular. Cassandra said, well, now that I'm 37, as a 61-year-old, just on a point of clarification, I interviewed Christopher James, Mannix Bailey and Edmund Cooper, who co-founded the punk band The Saints. I interviewed them in 1977, and for those who are cynical, it was the first punk single in the world. And who says that? Well, Sir Bob Geldof says that punk was invented by a band in Brisbane, The Saints, a band in New York, The Ramones, and a band in London called the Sex Pistols. So more power to Australian entrepreneurs. Cassandra will put this in her new book. It's called Sex, Drugs, Rock and Roll and Accountancy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we've got the luxury. We've got 25 and a bit minutes for Q&A, and someone is going to tell me about microphones.
Thank you. The problem with capitalism is not the small entrepreneurs or the butcher or the baker or the music entrepreneurs. The problem is corporate capitalism, which is the most effective destroyer of the world's environment, changing our climate beyond recognition, causing global warming with huge pollution, and is at a level that corporate capitalism really controls governments, particularly in the US, but to some extent in Australia. That's why we have a continuing pollution regardless scheme, not a carbon dioxide pollution reduction scheme.
Oliver. Oliver, you might like to address that.
Well, I knew... Is this microphone? Okay. I knew this was a dangerous ideas festival, so I've prepared for that. When you talk about corporate capitalism, I would even agree with you to a degree. I think what we have seen recently, how big companies behave, that doesn't necessarily have to do much with capitalism. When you look at the behavior of big companies, especially the companies that had to be bailed out by the taxpayer, that has nothing to do with the basic fundamentals, basic principles of capitalism, and that is liability for your own actions. You can't just do what you like, enrich yourself in the process, and when everything goes wrong, call for the taxpayer to bail you out. That's the first thing. But when it comes to the environment, well, first of all, I don't really think that an emissions trading scheme is the best way forward, full stop, because the way it is currently designed by politicians of all parties is basically exempting the big polluters from the system. So actually what you're creating is not some ingenious system, but you're actually creating some barriers to trade. These are trade barriers under WTO rules, and I think that that is one of the reasons why we shouldn't go forward with an ETS, but maybe we should just find a different solution. For example, a carbon tax, I think would be much better. I think you have to be careful. Not everything that is supposed to be capitalist actually is capitalist.
Another question. There's one... Yes, madam, thank you.
Do you have any thoughts on how capitalism has been so successful into seducing us to thinking that shopping is interesting and should take up every waking hour?
Cassandra.
I'll take a go at that. I'd start by saying that a lot of shopping's a really good idea because 200 million people in India and 300 million people in China over the last decade or so have been lifted out of poverty because they made crap that we went and bought, and that is fantastic. I'd also say that not everything that we buy is useless crap. And one of the interesting things about the arc of development is that, generally speaking, as countries become very rich, the scale, small government tends to be better at the beginning. People grow faster, get richer quicker. Then as you become rich as a nation, you tend to grow a larger government because people start to be concerned about distribution. Quite properly so. We start to think, we've got quite a lot of money now, why the hell isn't everybody going to school, and why aren't there nice parks and, medical research and other things? But what we spend our money on is actually much less cheap plastic, garbage and televisions even than we think. If you look at where most Australians are spending their extra money, it's on education. I don't think I'll find anyone in the room today who would say that more education's a bad idea or more healthcare is a bad idea. When you look at our patterns of consumption, we're generally consuming more of things that are actually really cool.
Oliver, a quick follow-up.
I'd just like to defend shopping. I've hit it really well so far, but some of you may have picked up I'm German. In any case, I remember vividly traveling to East Germany in 1988, so just a year before the wall came down, and we went to East Berlin, and we had to exchange some money. You know, the East German government was chronically bankrupt, and they always asked you to exchange some West marks into useless East marks. And so we had all this money with us, and then we thought, okay, we better go shopping. Big mistake. There was nothing, really. We went through all these wonderful shops and so-called supermarkets and department stores in East Berlin, and that was supposed to be the showcase of East German communism. And in the end, we had too much money left, and we stopped a trubby, knocked on the window and said, take your money, we don't find anything here. So, and when you then saw how the East Germans reacted in 1989 when the wall came down, the first thing was they went all to the West Berlin department stores, went shopping. So there must be something about shopping that people like, and I wouldn't exclude myself. And actually, if you say we spend too many hours shopping, I must say, I mean, I lived in London before you could shop 24 hours a day, and all the department stores closed down late at night, and I still find it quite relaxed, laid back here when major stores in Pitt Street Mall close down 5:30 on a usual working day. I don't think that's excessive, and as I said, I like shopping, and if I really want to do it afterwards, I can still do it on eBay.
I think we have another question over here, please.
Yeah, my question's kind of in two parts. Just remembering that this debate's about should people with flat-screen TVs stop whinging about capitalism. You were saying that capitalism is a system that best caters towards the bad things about humankind, the fact that we're greedy, we're self-interested. I mean to sort of ask, do you think that then that should be something that we're stuck with? Is it wrong to aspire to be the ideal man? Is it wrong to aspire to overcome greed? Or should we simply harness greed to the best of our ability? And I suppose the second part of that question is, it's an obvious solution that we should criticise capitalism and that we should at least be critical of it. But should it just be the people who are poor and who are disadvantaged by capitalism and by corporate capitalism who do that? Or isn't it a better thing when people who do have flat-screen TVs and who are the middle of the road, who are middle class, should actually question the system? Isn't it more effective when someone who's benefited from it can actually criticise it as well?
I think yes, but if I can add to that as well, yes, people should maintain their outrage. There is no way of living that is good enough. And I suppose my thought is that greed's probably not the word I like best to use about it. I think people who are driven and throw their energies into making money generally lack imagination. I work with a lot of people who are very motivated by making money, and they're incredibly tedious to hang out with most of the time. And people who are really exciting are usually the people who've become rich almost by accident or as a consequence because they were scientifically curious, because they were creatively motivated, because they, you look, for instance, at the people who invented container shipping, for instance. Now, that may sound boring. Again, I know I'm trying to say economics is more interesting than people think it is, but those people were motivated by great personal passion. And I think that that becoming the new man, so to speak, is possibly not a process of eradicating our greedy energies, but more embracing the part of them that wants to be smarter and more creative and to triumph over cancer and distance and poverty and any number of other things. You can be incredibly greedy for change and success in ways that have very little to do with plastic consumer goods.
Well, as I said, I'm very skeptical that it's actually possible to create a new man, because we have some instincts that have been with us in nature for such a long time that it's really going to be very, very difficult to actually change them. And I think actually trying to change them is dangerous, because it leads you onto the path of some kind of benevolent dictator who knows what's best for you. And I would be very skeptical, because all attempts to do that have failed miserably and have actually killed millions of people in the process. So I'm very skeptical about that. Having said that, I think, of course, we have to deal with it in the end. And the most effective way that I see dealing with all these characteristics and habits of human beings is the legal system. we should have a clear set of rules for capitalism. We should have liability rules. We have a contract law that actually makes it possible to enforce contracts that you have entered into, that punishes lying, that punishes you for misleading your consumers in business transactions. I think that's fine. We need rules. If I defend capitalism, that doesn't mean I defend anarchy. I defend a system that is based on rules, that has a clear legal system, and that really tries to deal with all these unpleasant human characteristics through the legal system, but not by creating a new man.
I come from Balmain and I love soy lattes. I found myself agreeing with almost everything that was said, and I was a bit surprised because I'm an anti-capitalist. But then I thought, actually, almost nothing was said about capitalism. A lot was said about effectively society improving, which improved a lot mainly by technological change, if you ask me. Nothing was said about how capital was organised at all, but a lot was said about free markets. Well, I'm in favour of free markets. I'm in favour of technological change. I'm in favour of health and education. What I'm not in favour of is capitalism. It's intrinsically evil to take other people's labour and make yourself rich. And actually, richness is evil too.
This is broadening the debate into economic theory, which is...
You say that you're all really rich, and you, particularly in a world where 500 million people live on $1 a day, you, sir, are a multi-bazillionaire. So if richness is evil, you really need to go hop in the harbour or something right now.
I actually wouldn't make the distinction too much between free markets and capitalism. In fact, I would suggest we are opening a self-help group, perhaps for anonymous capitalists, for you. But seriously, you call it exploitation, I call it trade. That's what happens when you get people together. People enter into contracts, whether it is buying a newspaper, buying a car, or actually exchanging your labor for a salary. That's basically the same story. You wouldn't do it if you didn't think you were better off at the end of it. And your employer wouldn't employ you if he didn't think that he would be better off by employing you. So I think it is a win-win situation, a classic win-win situation. There's no exploitation in the process. It's actually creating goods. It's trade. That's what we celebrate here.
This is not a political comment. I notice all the questions are coming from stage right. If you do want to ask a question, if you could just let the microphone man know, and if you move to the aisle, we can get you next time, sir. Thank you. There's a question over here now.
There's a lot of discussion in theory about which system's better, whether it's socialism or capitalism, which is kind of a very black and white argument. But I think maybe what the collapse of communism in '89 and the latest collapse or the crisis in capitalism here is less to do with the systems themselves, but with the concentration of any system in giving power to elites and it being not subject to checks and balances. And I think that's why, look, I myself am preferential to capitalism, and sort of, that's, I think, the system that we should continue to embrace. But on the other hand, I think if you take any amount of power and put it into any system, and elites in, whether it be communism or capitalism, the natural conclusion is for greed to push people to those extremes where crises happen. And, wherever there is massive greed and whether there is a massive concentration of power in a certain amount of executives, if it's unchecked, if any system is unchecked by democracy and by people taking an active interest in the system that's in their country, that's where the problem happens, and it's that greed that's been such a problem and that's brought down capitalism now, I think.
Well, I'm afraid I wouldn't quite agree with you on that one. I think capitalism has won in 1989 and socialism has clearly failed. And it was not just that they had a concentration of power somewhere in Moscow or in Warsaw or East Berlin, and that's why it didn't work. It is really because the system of socialism and communism simply cannot deliver. And there was a famous debate in economic theory, economics is all fun as we know, in the 1920s. And there were some now almost forgotten economists, one of them Ludwig von Mises, who demonstrated why socialism simply cannot work, because it can never get all the information necessary to run a market economy together in one place, so that an omniscient planner would have all the knowledge needed to run the economy. So he had some very good theoretical arguments already in the 1920s, when most of the economics profession was quite open to the idea of socialism and thought, well, maybe we should try that. And Mises said, no, you can't try it, because in the end it will be disastrous, and it will take as long as the longest capital goods survive, so about 70 years. Now, I mean, he probably foresaw that in 1989. No, not even in theory could socialism work. It simply can't, and we have seen it, and we have demonstrated time and again. I mean, how many case studies do you need? Look at Cuba, look at North Korea, look at East Germany. I mean, you had the perfect natural experiment with two Germanys, one embarking on capitalism and the other one on socialism, and then see which country collapsed. See, same story in North Korea. Culturally, the Koreans are all the same. The South prospers, the North is starving. I think there is no coincidence about this. It is true, and it's clear to see for everyone that socialism is failing.
A question from the front left, which is good. Here we go.
I think there's a whole body of evidence that the advertising industry does try, in terms of trying to manufacture demand that previously doesn't exist. There's a lot of evidence that it actually creates anxiety in people about their body image, anxiety in people about not having the latest flat screen TV or whatever. So there is a push to manipulate the way people think and create a new anxious consumer, and as was particularly criticised by the Saints in their song Know Your Product and that whole advertising push. Interested to hear what you've got to say on that.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the demonstration. Capitalism rocks. And under my suit, I'm a rock and roller. So that's all fine. About the advertising bit, well, I actually wrote my PhD thesis on the economics of advertising. What a coincidence. And I came to the conclusion in my thesis, actually, that no, we are all afraid of advertising. We think it really creates some demands that haven't been there before, and we are all kind of, it's like a kind of a remote control for, like the hapless consumer who really listens to Madison Avenue. And I think it's not true, because believe it or not, most people are not that dumb. And most people really think when they make purchases. And what advertising... No, I'm not sure about you, but sorry. but hang on. I think what advertising really does is it alerts you to products that you may not know yet, which may do a good job for you. I'm not talking about Botox here.
They stick bones through their noses and plates in their ears, and people have been physically anxious and physically enhancing themselves. We're a species that have been anxious for thousands of years. Each culture finds new ways to play out these anxieties and these pantomimes of social status. The issue for us, as is every culture, is to reject it. To actually stand up and just try to be confident. Can I say self-confidence is one of the ultimate acts of liberation? No, I'm saying that this is the same man and woman we have always been, always struggling to liberate ourselves from anxiety, always struggling to deal with the fact that we only prosper when we cooperate, and yet we're suspicious of each other. Like, we're all sitting in here saying, somewhere outside this room are other people who are manipulated by advertising, or people who can't be trusted to run corporations. Those people aren't in this room, but they're out there somewhere.
But I think it's
stand up.
If you can't admit that some aspects of the advertising industry deliberately try to undermine self-confidence
and exploit that anxiety to sell products that people
I don't think either of us disagree with that. Just simply saying that so do priests, so do kings and lords and barons, and so do secretaries of party secretariat number 5 in factory 14, you know. That's the nature of human society. We try to exploit and manipulate and extract value from each other. One of the things I guess that Oliver and I agree on is that, back to your point, nice young man over there, human beings, in whatever society we build, whether it's a corporation or a government or a system of management, try to dominate each other, and we all must resist being bossed around by a small group of idiots. And one of the reasons that we are passionate about, I want to call it free market economics. I don't really like the C word either particularly, but I'm passionate about free market economics because it goes hand in hand with democracy eventually in most places, and that is the surest way to stop people bossing me around is democracy.
You need advertising, you need persuasion. Before there was punk rock, nobody actually knew about it, so people needed to be introduced to the idea that punk rock was a great liberating movement, right? So that was advertising by another name.
Well, punk rock seems to be getting a lot of attention. We have a question way up the back.
I sort of instinctively agree with the free market or capitalist position because I like freedom. But when I'm debating with my friends, I'm always getting asked, the corollary of businesses succeeding and generating wealth is that a lot of businesses fail, which is fine until you get to the businesses which sell necessary goods like healthcare. And how do you deal with a system that has a built-in fact that businesses that sell healthcare are going to fail and people are going to suffer as a result? How do I answer that?
I don't mind.
Well, I was just going to say, I guess that to me is one of the arguments for diversity and distribution of risk. I think if you're in a community where you leave it up to a small group of people to say, you're right, healthcare is a problem, we're going to get those 5 guys to sort it out and tell everyone else what to do. Or you can live in a society where they say, you know what, this is really complicated and really hard and really high risk. Why don't we let 1,000 people work it out, 10,000, 100,000 people work it out? And if only 30% of them get it right, then at least those 30% can create the things we need. And providing we fail swiftly and learn from it and move on, there's nothing wrong with failure. Failure only matters and is only catastrophic when its consequence reaches everyone instead of just a few people.
I agree with that, and I also think we need liability rules that when things go wrong, that you can actually get some damages out of that case. And that has to be enforced. So I think that's another reason why we need rules and why we need a stable institutional framework for capitalism. But I also agree. I think what you also need is competition. And you would be better off in healthcare if you actually choose your doctor, if you have a choice of different therapies, and if you can basically shop around for whatever works best for you, because they will then have to compete for you as a customer. There's nothing worse than being in a system like Britain where you only have the NHS and they tell you which doctor to go to, and that's it. I think we need more choice, and that's one of the great things that capitalism can deliver.
Thanks.
We have another question up the back. We've got time after this for 2 quick questions.
Yes, you mentioned a lot about fairness as a necessary component of capitalism for it to succeed. And you've mentioned that regulations and laws often help to enforce this fairness in order so that capitalism doesn't fail. But we've also seen the government support corporate greed in certain cases. We've seen the bailouts. We've seen a lot of areas where corporate law has supported the corporations over the consumer. So what do you think is the answer to those situations? Is the answer to reduce regulation, maybe support what she mentions as anarcho-capitalism, the small corporations triumphing over the big ones, perhaps? I'm interested in your views.
I don't believe in anarcho-capitalism, I don't believe in anarchy, but I would generally like the government to stay out of corporate affairs. I think it is not only wrong, it is outrageous that the car industry that has failed to produce cars that people want to buy is now sucking up to the taxpayer and getting billions of dollars every year, because that's money that you pay.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have strict instructions. You will be out of here by 1:30. We've got time for one more quick question and then we'll have to wind up, I think, from this side and the lady there. Yes, thank you.
Hi. You seem to be talking about a very ethical form of capitalism, and I think that's great. But how do we ensure, in a time where it does seem that our society has a growing gap between the rich and the poor, how do we ensure that the poor has as much choice as the rich, especially in issues like medical care and things like that, essential services?
I guess I'd start by saying that that's actually not quite right. The growing gap argument, and I guess I'd recommend the ABS and various other non-political sources of long-term trends to check out the figures, but in Australia we have no growing gap between rich and poor, because as a community we take the ethical choice to redistribute our wealth, and that's not in a sort of ham-fisted socialist state kind of way, it's in a really informed, dynamic, democratic way. We insist on a debate at every election about the quality of schools and healthcare, and that's the reason that in Australia our growth has been distributed to the poor more than the rich. You go back to when the Henderson poverty line was first recorded, and people on the lowest incomes have had a 300% rise in their relative wealth since then, in real terms adjusted. The fact is, in Australia, the poor have been getting richer faster than the rich have been getting richer. Now, I say it's much more fun to be the rich getting richer, but in relative terms, we are taking the poor forward with us, and that when you look geographically and globally at the countries where that's not the case, it's generally speaking where you let a few people, whether they be a few corporations or a few politicians or a few generals, those are the places where you have income disparity.
Ladies and gentlemen, this debate's not over, but we're out of time. I just draw to your attention at 2:45 in the concert hall, there's an IQ debate. Following on from a debate about capitalism, says democracy's not for everyone. So you might be interested in that. But for now, could you please thank our speakers, Cassandra Wilkinson and Oliver Marc.